The rise in cost of living is affecting everyone. Sadly for me, I don't see any other option.
What is it about Bitcoin that can help people achieve a better life?
Geopolitically, sure. It's a very fragile time, and there's a very real threat of a nuclear war in continental Europe. This could be a wildly volatile year for markets based on the geopolitical stuff. I think it gives people control. You have no control over your savings when you save in fiat. For those who want control of their future, saving in Bitcoin is mandatory.
October 2024, we have signed a mandate with the World Economic Forum, Australia 100% cashless.
I think it's a control mechanism to stop us doing what we want. I'm particularly concerned about the CBDC. I think functionally it's already here. And this is really concerning from a financial perspective, but they've now removed that requirement. There's no credit on the Bitcoin network. It's all a digital bearer instrument, which is the complete antithesis to the traditional banking system that we're familiar with. What this really represents is the third wave of human evolution, I believe. A diametric shift to the way we've done things previously. A society built on truth and trust is a high-functioning society. I think this time is different. On a risk-adjusted basis, this is the best time to be buying Bitcoin. You now have institutional support. You have ETFs providing daily liquidity and demand. This puts, to me, a floor on the price and a perpetual bid on Bitcoin. What I can tell you is today, if you're hearing this today is the opportunity.
So the last couple of years, it sounds like the world's gone pretty crazy. The money printing that we had in 2020 was absolutely insane. They have stopped that. They jacked interest rates up the fastest time in human history. The Fed has said they expect rate cuts to happen in this year as well. What do you see playing out within the global economy in 2024 and beyond?
That's a great question. And I think I'm not relying on any rate cuts.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we're going to get it. And I think we could see an inflation spike.
Just in Australia or worldwide?
Globally.
Yep.
I think from the uptick recently in inflation and where are we at the moment, 23rd of March, I think these rate cuts, we did talk about having 4 rate cuts this year. Now it's down to 2 back end of the year. Are we really going to see that the way the inflation's upticked? I don't think that is. And I think probably a nice way to live or think about things is, prepare for maximum pain.
Yeah.
What does maximum pain look like? Well, looks like interest rates are going up, not down. And there's a very real possibility that if inflation starts, ticking up like it has and continues that way, then we're not getting rate cuts. We're getting rate increases.
What happens then to the everyday person? Like a lot of people went out at 0% interest rates, got $1 million mortgage that they could just or barely afford. They've been jacked up so high, they've used all their savings, they've maxed out all their credit cards, they are already feeling that max pain. If they were then to increase those interest rates yet again, that sounds like a catastrophe waiting to happen.
Sadly, I think there is a possibility of that. And I think if you're in that position or close to it, you need to start preparing accordingly that, it might not be a rate cut this year.
Yeah.
Sadly for most people who have mortgages who are in that position, it's a very hard thing to discuss because you want to be, preparing for the worst, hoping for the best. But, and this is the problem, what we've got is that we've got people who have taken on more debt than they can afford. They're struggling to pay it back. And so what happens, they then start eating into their savings. Yeah. Then they go onto their credit card and then they look for assets to sell to meet that loan repayment. And this is the sad problem is that's further compounded by the fact that while you're doing that, the asset value that you're hoping to get, say $1 million for, is depreciating in value too. Yeah. And that is it's a double whammy. So for me, it's a really tough decision. You're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do you sell now, take whatever capital you can preserve out, and then go on rent? So you've literally got more savings for buying again later, or do you try and hold on in the hope that they typically haven't? And this is where rates slowly go up and then elevate it down because they go too far and they need to restart the economy and get it off life support because they invariably always go too far. Now, are they going to do that this time? I don't know. But that's $1 million question about how do people hold on, because that's the difficulty in doing this. And I don't have any good questions, but the rise in cost of living is affecting everyone. Yeah. It's not just an inflation thing. It's not just an interest rate thing. We are getting it from every angle.
Yeah.
And sadly for me, I don't see any other option than Bitcoin. And I've looked. This is literally my job day to day. How do we find opportunities to outperform market and the rest of it, and start by earning more than you spend or spending less than you earn.
Yeah. So just on that, people are feeling max pain within their mortgage, the cost of living, inflation, like you're saying, we're being hit from every angle. How does Bitcoin fix this? Because that's something else that they need to spend their fiat money on. Like, that's another expense.
That's a great question. This is where maybe in your household budget there's no room for that. And that's very difficult. So look to cut costs anywhere that you can. But if that's no longer feasible and the household budget is off the table for buying Bitcoin, fortunately in Australia we have a superannuation or pension system that allows us to go and buy Bitcoin.
Yep.
And I look at this and think, well, there is this, an obvious safety valve that, you can put your retirement funds into Bitcoin, self-custody that yourself, and you no longer have the excuse that you can't buy Bitcoin because you can't afford it, because you've got a pot of money there that you are unable to touch until you reach a preservation age, typically 60 to 65 years of age.
Yeah.
And this is a pot of capital that anyone who's working in the country, in Australia at the moment, has access to.
Yeah.
Really quickly, ladies and gentlemen, I've teamed up with the Bitcoin Way. This is the professional Bitcoin IT team. They can help you master your Bitcoin self-custody. Safetina Moose, the author of the Bitcoin Standard, also recommends this professional Bitcoin IT cybersecurity team. Their guys are absolutely amazing. They can help you set up a node, protect your stack, get your Bitcoin off the exchange. Make sure that you are following best practices. Number one, that it's air-gapped. If you don't know what that means, I've put their details below for you. If you're worried about SIM swaps, reach out to the Bitcoin Way. Maybe you just want to know that you are doing the best thing. You're doing all the little tricks within your device to be able to make sure nobody can ever get into your Bitcoin, have any access. If you've got any queries about connecting to public USB and charging points, connecting to rogue Wi-Fi access points or malware-infected USB cables and flash drives, reach out to the Bitcoin cybersecurity team, the Bitcoin Way. Free 30-minute call. They are at the top of the description.
And I guess through like IRAs over in the States with the ETF, I know the ETF isn't real Bitcoin. It gives number go up technology, but it is allowing them exposure, I believe. Is it like a Roth IRA or through different retirement accounts as well to be able to use those funds? And yes, they can't spend it, but that's a good thing. It's forcing them to hold for the long term and not coming out of their own money. So I guess that's a little bit of hope. Why Bitcoin though? You said you looked at everything else. What is it about Bitcoin that can help people achieve a better life? Like, all anyone wants is more time and more energy. People think they want more money. It's the things that money can provide. How does Bitcoin provide those things?
That's a very big question, and for me, Bitcoin has had a huge impact on my life in a number of different ways. It's given me hope for the future, which is a huge, huge thing. It's shown me that there is an ability to save money. And I'll redefine that. We've always had an ability to save money, but this is the first time in a long time that we've had the ability to save money and actually progress financially and be rewarded for that saving. This is the first time in a long time that's happened. And when you have that ability, that has the ability to then change your mindset to start thinking of the future and start planning for what you hope to be a better future. Because now you can rest assured that if you save, if you sacrifice, because you think about spending, right? Or you think about saving. What is saving? Well, it's sacrificing the today for tomorrow.
Yeah.
And this is where we have been encouraged to spend, and we have been talked out of saving for our future.
I don't even know if we've been talked out of it. Just saving for the future just seems so asinine, because say you had $100,000 3 years ago, you can buy $50,000 worth of stuff now. So it's not even they talked us out of it. It's just that we saw it for ourselves, that spend all this time saving and we're going backwards.
That's true. And this is when you look at, and this is where I try and boil everything down, particularly when it comes to investments. Well, what are the incentives? And under a fiat system, we're incentivised to spend and consume as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Because so is melting ice cube. It's going to melt and you're going to have nothing in a minute. To your point, we've lost 50% in 3 years of purchasing power if you held it in dollars. Versus Bitcoin, if you held it for 3 years, it's probably tripled, at least doubled in value.
Depending when you bought it, maybe even a lot more. Especially March 2020. For anyone that knows, they know a glorious time. So there's these opportunities. We do see information coming out and maybe a little bit of programming or propaganda. 2024, the year of chaos. The most amount of elections that are happening globally on a global scale. What are some of the things, and it can be related to Bitcoin or not, but in regards to our monetary system, do you see any fundamental shifts happening in this year or because of actions that could potentially play out during 2024?
Geopolitically, sure. It's a very fragile time in geopolitical terms. We've got war in the Ukraine and Russia. That's the first time since World War II we've had war on that continent. That's a huge deal, and people want to try and talk that down, but there's a very real threat of a nuclear war on in continental Europe. That's insane. That's the first time we've ever had to it's the first time in 40 years we've had to worry about that. But that is a very real concern. You look at the Middle East; that's the most turbulent it's been in decades. You've got Israel and Palestine at war. Whether they want to say that or not, it's a pretty lopsided war at the moment. But it's hugely contested, and there's a lot of rumblings. You've got the Red Sea, you've got Suez Canal, you've got all sorts of problems with that are going to impact economically as well. And this is where I look at this and think that this could be a wildly volatile year for markets based on the geopolitical setup.
Yeah. So what happens, say the stock market crashes? Actually, first let's go back a little bit. Property here in Australia, our house has gone up about 100% in the last 4 years or whatever. The Australian Ponzi scheme, it's been absolutely fantastic for us. But everything's gone up. So if you sell it now, you're still paying higher costs anywhere. Do you see Australian property continuing to go up regardless of what they do with rates? Or if they keep rates, we will see a bit of a roll-off and it'll transition into different assets? Or how's the market going to play out specifically in Australia with hard assets, the stock market, real estate?
I'm really not sure. So I'll give you the pros and cons and explain why I'm thinking. Pros, and why I think it will go up, is that we've got immigration second to none in the world, just about. We've got 5% of our total population coming to the country every year. Now,
that's a lot.
It's huge. In terms of the US, that would be 17.5 million people per annum coming in. That's over a million. Well, what is it? Nearly 1.5 million people a month into the US in those terms. They don't have that.
Yeah.
They haven't had that even with the open border at the south. So there is a demand for this product, and homing or housing, I should say, that we've got immigrants lined out the door to come to the country. That's a huge demand driver. We have liquidity coming back, another huge driver, and that is probably the most important driver for determining what house prices are doing. The flip side of that is we've got interest rates very high. Credit is choked off. The problem with the credit market at the moment, or the property market, is that it's very difficult to get credit, much harder than it has been in previous years. We have rates now moving from 2% to 6% plus. All of a sudden, that's very expensive for new entrants to get into the market. So I personally think there needs to be an adjustment, but there's plenty of reasons to think that that's not going to happen.
Interesting.
So I just don't know. And this isn't just an Australian problem. This is pretty much a global problem.
Yeah. So how can Bitcoin potentially help people? Where's Bitcoin come into the conversation?
I think it gives people control and a peace of mind once they understand it. So a point I should have mentioned earlier is that with savings, you have no control over your savings when you save in fiat, because...
Sure, it's my money, of course I do.
That's a very good point. But You see it's not, and you've got no ability to determine or stop the dilution of your money. With Bitcoin, it's a fixed supply, so you own a percentage of the network, and you can be assured that you're going to own the same percentage of the network tomorrow, in a year, in 10 years from now, if you don't spend your Bitcoin. That is a huge deal that people overlook, and the ability to preserve your purchasing power then allows you to start making a plan. And it incentivises you to spend less than you earn, because you know that if you save $1 today, it's going to be worth $10 in the future. Whereas at the moment, when you save in fiat, if you save $1 today, you know it's going to be worth 50 cents in 3 years. So it's all about incentives, and this is where, for those who want control of their future, saving in Bitcoin is mandatory.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. So one of these things, and I covered it on the news a week ago, probably by the time this podcast comes out, is Australia has been moving towards a cashless society for a very long time. I saw an article and I tried to verify it that October 2024 we have signed a mandate with the World Economic Forum, Australia 100% cashless. I couldn't verify that as much as I'd like to, but when I did do my verification check, the Queensland government website came up, and while they didn't give us a date or a year for cashless, they plainly said we are moving towards a cashless society. We're seeing the smaller banks consolidate into the bigger banks. So I have two parts to the question. What happens when Australia and the world goes cashless? Also, what does CBDCs mean for people that have Bitcoin or for the people that don't have Bitcoin? And is a cashless society, CBDCs, the fear-mongering like China, the social credit scores, is all this fear-mongering and it's just there to disempower people, or it is something that could potentially actually happen, or it's definitely actually going to happen?
There's a lot covered there. I think it's already happened. I think it's a control mechanism to stop us doing what we want, and for the government to force policies on us without any political consensus. That is a huge concern for anyone who values their freedom or their choice to choose what they wish. I look at that and think it's hugely concerning. And if you applied that to any other facet of life, the ability to spend your money how you wish is the ability to speak your mind. And so I'm particularly concerned about the CBDC. I think functionally it's already here. And we have already had people censored. We already have banks telling their customers that they're not allowed to send their money to where they wish.
Yeah, shout out to Commonwealth Bank. Yeah, bunch of commies.
And that's true. They're stopping people, sending money to who they would like to.
Why are they doing this? Like, I understand when we put money in the bank account, we no longer have control and they have control over their money. Most people think the bank's just looking after it for them and it's still their money and they can do whatever they want. People that don't know, Commonwealth Bank, $10,000 a month. Sounds like a lot of money. It's only $120,000 a year. If people have worked their whole lives, they find out about Bitcoin, they want to put $1 million into Bitcoin straight away. Well, they can only put 10% of that in. So why are they slowing down these exit ramps?
For your safety.
Yeah,
that's what
sure.
they tell us.
Absolutely, it's what they tell us. But what do you believe the real reason behind it? Are they scared, or they don't want the money leaving their broken system?
A number of things. And to be fair to the banking system, there is...
you don't need to be. They're not fair to anyone else.
That's true. They don't have an incentive not to. So in banking, all of the exchanges, there is high risk associated with that banking service and very little revenues attached to it. So back to the incentives. What's their incentive to allow this to happen? There's a very high probability of fraud relative to every other industry, and to your point earlier, the cash goes in and it actually leaves the system, so that is terrifying for them. Now, to put this in economic terms for the business and profit drivers, long story short, there is a requirement across all the global banks that they are required to have capital requirements in order to lend money out. Now, in order to lend out $1 million on a home loan, they had to have 5% in cash on their balance sheet. That would be $50,000. And so with $50,000 on the balance sheet through rehypothecation and effectively multiplying that out, they can loan out $1 million.
Yeah.
That $1 million on a 2% margin would generate roughly a $20,000 return for the bank as far as profit goes. That's a 40% return on that $50,000 that they're receiving. Now, the numbers aren't quite like that, but I like to simplify it just to show you that there is a huge profit driver to ensure that that money remains on the balance sheet to allow for the liquidity and the lending that they require.
Yeah.
Now, and this is really concerning from a financial perspective, but they've now removed that requirement to some degree across some of the global banks, that they no longer need to hold any cash in order to generate a loan. They just have to think about it, and they can print money. And I look at this in stark contrast to the Bitcoin system, and I think there's no way anyone can do that. There's no credit on the Bitcoin network. It's all a digital bearer instrument, which is the complete antithesis to the traditional banking system that we're familiar with. And this is probably to the point why Bitcoin is so difficult to understand, is because everything they told you about the current banking system, they told you was wonderful about it, turns out might have some concerns around that and not be as wonderful as we're told. And Bitcoin operates in the complete opposite realm, where it's 100% equity and 0% credit.
Yeah, it's really amazing the longer and the deeper you dive into Bitcoin. The way that Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever that group of people or that individual was, how they pulled all these things, and I was saying to Eric Kaysen earlier, it really feels like it's the most verifiable piece of truth that we have on planet Earth, and it happens to align as a monetary technology. But I don't think there's anything else really, apart from things that are natural, like the sun or trees, that are just truth.
Or the history books.
Oh yeah, 100%. All of that definitely happened. And that's another thing that's amazing about Bitcoin as well. We can actually record history reliably for the first time in human history.
It's funny, I agree with you, and this is, to me, a huge point that I think often gets lost because we come for number go up. But what this really represents is the third wave of human evolution, I believe. Firstly, we had the pre-written word, where we were running around hunting woolly mammoths. Excuse me. Then we had the written word, where we wrote down what we thought on a piece of paper, and we said, yep, that's exactly what happened, and here's the note that proves it. And now we move to the recorded history, where there is no ability to change what happened. All of a sudden, this is a diametric shift to the way we've done things previously. Much the same way as the banking was credit, this is equity. We had written word, now we have recorded word, and this is a fundamental upgrade to the way our society operates. We just can't see that yet, and we don't know what the applications are and how that's going to improve our society, but a society built on truth and trust is a high-functioning society.
Yep. I believe a lot of people are starting to really wake up to the power that Bitcoin can play, whether in their portfolios for their individual or the balance sheet for their businesses or corporations. And it's only really recently, and I'd even say only in 2024 is the year we're in, or are we in 23? 24?
24, yeah.
Yeah, it's gone so quick. It's absolutely amazing. And being in Bitcoin, like every week feels like 7 weeks. It just moves so fast. Has BlackRock fundamentally changed the conversations that you were having? Because you spend a lot of time talking to high net worth individuals. You've been in finance for your whole career, been in Bitcoin for a long time. Because Larry Fink is basically turned into our de facto marketing manager, has the conversation changed, or the circle of people you're already talking to, it's just the same conversations now? Is it different? Like, is this time this different, this cycle?
I think this time is different. There's a legitimacy when Larry Fink speaks that people take him seriously.
Why?
His opinion has huge weight and consequence in the world of finance, and therefore the globe, full stop. I think people don't really comprehend the magnitude of his influence and the ability he has to shift outcomes. And I look at the climate change agenda, where people want to have carbon credits and corporate accountability and the rest of it. this diversity, equity, inclusion. This movement was bootstrapped by Larry Fink. It was nowhere prior to his engagement in that, and in the period of 7 years, he's got that into every boardroom. We now have accounting on that. We now have talk of having credit cards that are going to track our carbon footprint.
Amazing.
And this is an outcome that he wanted to achieve. And I look at this and I think, that as much as I distrust that outcome that he's tried to achieve with that, when his focus now turns to Bitcoin and our incentives align with his, what does a marketing genius like that accomplish when he has, I guess, a good that is going to improve humanity, and most importantly for Larry, it's going to improve his hip pocket.
Yeah. One thing that I find fascinating is that meme, you can't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. But since BlackRock in particular have filed and they've launched this Bitcoin ETF, they're starting to move away from that ESG narrative as well. Like, is that a coincidence, or is it because Bitcoin is fundamentally changing the way that Larry Fink is going to operate and do business?
I think it comes down to two things. Firstly, there's a financial incentive to move away from the ESG narrative now.
Yeah.
That whole ESG narrative, although he's fully responsible, for getting that into the corporate boardrooms, that no longer serves his purpose, because now it's costing him money to push that agenda. You've had a number of states withdraw their pension funds from BlackRock managing those, and that's costing him personally. So for that reason, that's given him pause for thought about how hard and fast he wants to push this agenda. And then you counterbalance that with the fact that Bitcoin is the only way of reducing in an economically friendly manner, or improving climate change outcomes as determined by them. This is the fastest way to do it. I look at this and I think Larry gets a 2-for-1, and he's figured that out. I get to improve outcomes from an ESG perspective. I don't have to talk about ESG, and it's going to improve my hip pocket faster than anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, what's not to love about that?
Agreed. This cycle, and I said it before, like, this time is different. The ETFs are here, and that's really been the main narrative. What would you say to people that have no coins? Like, maybe this is their first Bitcoin podcast. G'day, welcome. It's good for you to be here. Should they just buy some, or is there resources you'd send them to? Because Bitcoin's gone up a lot. Like, even in the last 2 years, it's gone up 4x in price from the lows. Can sound pretty expensive. I still think it's very cheap. But what's sort of the approach and the mindset that people should, if they're just hearing about it now?
I think it's important to consider Bitcoin where it is today in context of where it's come from. And on a risk-adjusted basis, this is the best time to be buying Bitcoin. You now have institutional support, you have ETFs providing daily liquidity and demand. This puts, to me, a floor on the price and a perpetual bid on Bitcoin. This totally redefines the risk-return parameters for it. And to those people who think that they've missed the opportunity of Bitcoin because it's gone up so much, I would urge them to look at a term called unit bias and study that and understand the fact that Bitcoin has more returns in front of us than behind us. So if I took you back to 2009 and said, hey, here's this thing, you're going to be able to buy it for 0.1 of a cent, I'd like you to chuck $100 in, what do you think? People say, no way, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Now, in hindsight, if they came from the year 2024, went back to 2009, they would put their life savings into it. Now, what I can tell you is, today, if you're hearing this today is the opportunity that they had back in 2009 to buy Bitcoin.
Yeah. There's so many things coming as well. Like, the ETFs have really only been out for 2 months, basically, like 2 months worth of trading days. What do you see next for Wall Street? Like, I understand a lot of us can feel like Wall Street's an attack. I think to negate that, the easiest way is just to hold your Bitcoin in self-custody, and you can reach out to Peter if you need help with that. But what's Wall Street? Because they're always coming up with these crazy products and stuff, and to be able to get people excited. What's the next thing? The ETF's here. What else could excite people again and bring in even more liquidity?
I think tapping the bond market, and how they do that is through the structured products. So Wall Street's now capable of creating a principal protected note JP Morgan could go out and create that tomorrow, raise $10 billion to create a principal protected note.
What is a...
That would work. Very simply, what they'd do is they'd go out and buy $8 billion worth of 5-year treasuries, and it'd be a 5-year note, capital guaranteed, so that you'd get paid back in nominal terms, not real terms, the initial capital that you put in. And they would take 80% of that $10 billion, they'd go and buy the 5-year US treasuries, and so that 80% would grow to 100% of what you put in over the 5 years. But with the remaining 20% that wasn't invested, they can then go and buy Bitcoin with it. And now all of a sudden you can get a juiced up, capital guaranteed product that invests 20% of that capital into Bitcoin.
Wow.
And I look at this and I think everyone's frothing over the ETFs and the amount of flows that have come into this. And I think if you understood in context of the GFC what caused it, the fact that we went out the risk curve as far as eligible borrowers for credit, Bitcoin is the perfect collateral that doesn't require borrowers. And all of a sudden, Wall Street has the ability to package this up and sell an infinite amount of it. And what's really interesting about this is it incentivises Wall Street to go out and package these up and buy Bitcoin. It also incentivises the US government to print more money to give them the bonds to put in these structured products. And I look at this and I think this could be the most synergistic set of circumstances that leads to the US government absolutely thrilled to print to infinity and provide the treasury notes required to fill these products. And the GFC and what happened there with the mortgage-backed securities, I believe that whole circus is going to pale in comparison to the froth and hysteria that's going to be created with these structured products.